Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got a new guest on the show. I've got Angelica Ortega on the show, and today we are focusing on an area of cybersecurity that I feel like is not talked about nearly enough. We're talking about the psychological side of cybersecurity. We're talking about threat actor motivations, we're talking about different kinds of threat actors and the motivational differences between each group. We're talking about how even blue team members might have narcissistic tendencies, which is an interesting conversation. We even talk about romance scams, pig butchering, and the psychological fallout that victims go through. So we've got that and lots more in today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insight straight from the security lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got a new face on the show today. I've got Angelica Ortega. How's it going, Angelica?
It's going great. Thanks, Andy, for having me today.
Yeah, it's fun. I always like to get new folks on the show, just because it's always nice to have a number of different viewpoints, and especially given our topic today, most of the people I have on the show are, super deep in the weeds in the tech space, and not to say that you're not, but you are coming at it more from a psychology perspective today. And I guess, that's kind of what we're talking about today. Is we are talking about basically the psychological background of cybercriminals, which is a topic people on the show know that I've wanted to get to for some time. But before I get too far and too excited to talk about our topic here, Angelica, I want to give you a second to introduce yourself and tell our viewers and listeners about you. So take it away.
Yeah. This is great, and I'm really excited to be here. And again, you are so right. I'm not in the weeds, and I'm not technical at all. But I love, and I'm a geek in the psychology of the cyber criminal items. So, a bit about me. So, for the last decade, I've been in the corporate world, working in talent, business operations for Microsoft, Visa, and Meta. I love all talent things, but I study psychology, and I geek out on understanding the reasons as to why criminals, hacktivists, nation state do the things they do, and I try to bring those bridges, and I help now. I founded Novify, so 2 years ago now. So I help Web3 security and cybersecurity startups bring their talent in and bring go-to-market experts on board. So I hear those stories on a daily, and I hear all the technical stuff. So I'm really excited to be talking about the non-technical but also very important things about psychology.
It's good having you on the show, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. And I look back at my tenure in the cybersecurity space and just tech in general. There's been a lot of times where I've looked at an attack or somebody behaving in a certain way, and I'm like, why? Why did they do this? Why do they do these things, right? And so there's not enough discussion, in my opinion, on kind of the psychological background of cybercrime. And when we break it down, at least from the cybersecurity blue team angle, the defensive side of cybersecurity, hackers tend to fall into three categories from what we see. So we've got your nation state threat actors, right? So these are highly sophisticated, well-funded, super driven nation-state actors that typically are targeting other nations and or critical infrastructure associated with other nations, right? Or meddling in elections. I think it was Ramon Bassett and we actually did an episode on how threat actors interfere with the election process. I'll put that in the show notes below, folks, so you can take a look at that. The other two areas we've got are hacktivists and cybercriminals. Now, hacktivists are, they tend to be more sophisticated than your average cybercriminal, and typically they are trying to get their message out there in some way, shape, or form, right? They've got some, philosophical message, or they want to draw attention to a political ideology or something. The one group that comes to mind for me on that is Anonymous Sudan. They are a threat actor group that I think that was with Ramon Bassett as well. He and I covered Anonymous Sudan on a separate episode of the show. And so they are considered to be hacktivists, right? They make these really big, splashy, high-profile attacks to push their message. Then we come to your cybercriminals, right? And these are individuals or groups that are, well, they're just out to make money, essentially, is what it comes down to. So, typically those are where I see people fall. And of course, you've got people that, like anything, they kind of fall maybe in between those, but those generally tend to be the three groups. I don't know if you've got any thoughts or feedback on that, Angelica.
Definitely. And when I've been reading, obviously you mentioned we don't talk about these topics so often. So I try to read about these topics often enough, and I don't find a lot of research, but people like, Jessica Barker or Sarah Armstrong, they really outline this information. And I think the difference between criminals, hacktivists, and nation state, you've defined that very well, where the criminals really have this financial incentive. So they just want to go out there and have money, and doesn't matter what it takes. And they love having that risk-taking behavior. So for me here, and I know I've mentioned I wouldn't go too much into the depths of what psychologists look at, which is what it's called the manual, the DSM, where it's a manual where you can find, the trends of personality disorders. But just in grosso modo, financial incentive, risk-taking behavior, that could really make us think, narcissism sort of trends, antisocial trends, where we don't really care what the consequences are as long as I get my final goal. And I'm not going to have any regret about it, right? So the criminal side of things is very basic and very complex at the same time, and really difficult to narrow down into one category as a personality disorder, as it were. And the hacktivists, the same, but there's more ideological beliefs within it. So, and there's kind of like an desire to push and change things. So they feel like morally they have to do this thing wrong, or to promote the transparency to change. So there's a more of a like ideological belief rather than a financial incentive. So when I've been reading about that, is like the main difference that I can see. And obviously the first that you were mentioning is the nation state actors. So here, yes, it's more, rather than ideological beliefs, it's more like political goals, right? So, and they're so well funded, and they have so many resources, that it's really, but they're also decentralized, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's really hard to track down, because there's this decentralization, that you have a strategic context and you have this political sort of obligation, but how do you trace that? So I think it's very interesting, but again, really, really complex. And within these three main categories, it's just, there's a lot of like breakdowns, and the narcissism and the antisocial sort of trends is where I would see this going, if I had to make an assumption here.
Right. And that kind of lines up with, I want to say it was 2 years ago now. We did a kind of like a roundtable discussion with some of our internal security experts, and we had a guy by the name of Mark Hoffman on the show. I think he's out of Switzerland. Don't quote me on that. But he, it's funny, he mentioned almost exactly what you just mentioned as well, and that narcissism is like one of the key psychological traits in most cyber criminals. Now, the other thing he said, and I've thought about this over the years, I remember this, and this stuck with me too. He said that narcissism can also be found in blue team, as well on the defensive security side. And I guess I've thought about that over the years, and I'm like, really? But I have seen security professionals that they have kind of this sense that like, well, my defenses are so good they'll never be breached. You know what I mean? And so like I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess I can see it, right? So
Yeah. No, and this is very interesting because it really depends on your end goal, right?
Right.
Because, I put a post up a few months ago about the beekeeper, the film. I know it's very vanilla to say that, but obviously, what's his name? The actor.
Jason Statham.
Jason Statham, which I love, so I don't know why I forgot his name now. But he plays an actor. Normally he has this type of roles, but he's quite a narcissist, and he maybe wouldn't be in the blue team per se, but what I'm trying to say is like the end goal of what it is to defend what I think, and I'm going to kill all these people, and it doesn't matter if that's right or wrong, and what legal barriers I'm breaking, that I'm going to get to it. So at the end of the day, what you see is the goal, and what's the legal barrier that you're crossing. If you are crossing it, then you are a criminal. But if you are not, being a narcissist, or I shouldn't say be a narcissist because that's wrong psychologically, but having traits of narcissism, it doesn't necessarily mean do something wrong. It's just that you really believe in yourself that what you're doing is right. And if you're taking it to the other side, then we will have some issues. So I think what your guest was saying, it's kind of true, and you seeing it as well, because the blue teams, I really love that, defense and monitoring like focus, and you really have to be very resilient psychologically, because you have to have this kind of proactive mindset to anticipate and mitigate the threats, and that can be so exhausting that if you don't have a really strong belief in yourself, that I just don't know how you guys, I really look up to the blue teams, right? Because it's very exhausting psychologically to be ahead of everything. So when you're so deep in the weeds, that just, again, we kind of talk about the psychological impact of the cyber attackers, but what about the ones that you are in the weeds to make it, preserve it, and also the guys that are affected by the criminals, right? So I think that it's a 360 that needs to be really looked at and really talked about, and I really admire what your work is.
I think a lot of the listeners on the show would love that you just said that, because I think that's something that's not talked enough, especially outside of the cybersecurity space, in that the way I often hear it described is threat actors, they only have to get it right one time, whereas blue team, they have to get it right every single time. There can't be a single slip up, right? And so to your point, that is very psychologically draining, right? And I think that's why, and this is probably a whole different podcast discussion, I think that's why burnout is rampant in the cybersecurity industry, right? So I definitely think there's something there.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd love to talk about the burnout and the psychological safety in teams. Amy Edmondson talks a lot about it, where you feel safe and secure to make mistakes, and that's not going to be the end of the world. Because in your space it is kind of the end of the world, because it's all out in the news, and it was the one mistake, and It is very tough, and I think there's a lot of a whole podcast to be talking around the burnout and psychologically safe teams, which I think it really needs, especially in a very stressful ecosystems of work like it is cybersecurity. And Web3 security, which is another world in the crypto space, and it's up and coming as well. But yeah, the same that you were talking about the blue teams, the same goes for the ethical hackers, right? And the white hats, as you like, because there's a lot of also altruism that needs to come from that personality, because yes, the financial incentive is there, maybe more than blue teams. I don't know if I'm saying something silly here, but
No.
when I've been reading that, there's a lot of certifications that go around it, and they have that, but there's a lot of these sort of motivations are really great motivations, but I think it's a very big impact as well, isn't it?
Right, for sure. And it's finding a good certified ethical hacker that has the experience and also has the ethics, because ethics is very important in that particular job role, right? Because you're doing things that a threat actor would do, right? But, typically ahead of time, you're defining what your scope is. I'm allowed to operate within these boundaries. And I can't speak from experience because I'm not a penetration tester or anything like that. But I have to imagine that there are times where they come up to that boundary and the only thing stopping them from going past it are their own personal ethics, right? So.
And you have to have a really strong personality for that. And I guess, you see people that have gone from one extreme to the other, right? So how the social engineering and the social external factors can impact the way we behave. So this is very interesting, and you can see this is not just happen during the cyber times and crypto times. It just happened, you get Robin Hood stories and all of that, because anything that because we haven't discovered anything new. We're just discovering ways to patch it, because we're trying to go in shape or to protect and have a more secure and ethical digital future,
Right.
because everything is moving so quickly, but none of this is new, is it?
Right. Yeah, it's not. And then one thing you just said, I want to make sure we cover before we, move on to our next talking point is you mentioned crypto. And when we talk about motivations, we've kind of talked about the risk-taking behavior. We've talked about, there's an air of narcissism that may be part of the motivation. There's, of course, the nation-state motivations and the hacktivist motivations, right? But for the cybercriminal, it often comes down to that monetary component, right? And cryptocurrency has really kind of, I guess I want to say, supercharged that particular motivator, because, back in the pre-crypto days, it was very difficult to, get paid for illicit activities and keep that, relatively secret. But now with cryptocurrency, it is very easy to obfuscate that payment, and it's very difficult for law enforcement to track. So I feel like that has really kind of enabled that behavior as well.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't to say more or less than before, but certainly since Bitcoin, like back in 2009, was first put up by Satoshi, anonymously, of course, that has been a huge increase. And the difference is that in the blockchain, you see $30 million transactions as a normal thing, right? So.
Right.
That's even more scary, because we're talking about bigger sums, and that can really impact to people who have been scammed even more. So that's why they keep saying in the crypto space, if you cannot chuck this money away, do not put it in. And obviously I want to go a little bit more on the technical side of things and give you a couple of examples, but I just thought about early this morning, I just had a flash of a couple of years back, just after the pandemic, one of my best friend's sister, and here's where you can see a little bit of the personality and the personal circumstances that anybody can go through, because she's a very technical person with a very technical job in the security space, but she was married, then divorced, had a kid, looking after himself on her own, and second kid on the way. And so she had some savings, and she was chatting to someone online, and obviously we didn't have that in the past, right? So dating apps again, and she kind of she was talking to me and her sister about it, and she went and then say, because she knew that I liked it, I wasn't investing, but I liked it and I was reading about it. And she said, I've met this person that knows everything about crypto and has mentioned this really good investment and show me this platform. And I had all these red flags everywhere.
Yup.
Yeah. And then I thought, what do I do? Because she kind of really trusted this person, and I think in a more romantic way as well. And so that was my red flags flying around from everything that I'm reading. And, you need to be very careful how you approach that, especially from a psychological approach. You can never go, whoa, red flag, because what it's going to happen is say, what you're saying, I'm never going to tell you anything anymore. This is my life, right? They're going to feel attacked and threatened, and it's going to be worse. So I thought, let me just listen, because I love talking. That's the Spanish in me. I just talk and give my opinion, and I thought, let's pause. But long story short, they fell in love, and so she showed me that platform that looked completely legit. I'm talking about 6-digit savings that she had, and she said to me, I'll be able to get returns in each quarter. So it sounded all very good, the new kid coming along. And one day I was at the time, it was just after the pandemic, and I was staying with a friend. I was working for Microsoft at the time, and she woke me up and said, Angelica, wake up. I got my sister on the phone crying her eyes out. She absolutely had not even a penny left in her platform. So that was oh gosh, the red flags. Should I have said something, right? And I was thinking more about how can we solve this now, rather than the consequences that this is going to have, because you're not going to see this money ever again. Unfortunately, right? And I'm laughing now, but and she was crying her eyes out. I was as well. And so, and this person said that he hired someone, from the security, a very legit person, to help get the money back. And so I thought, someone getting involved to get your crypto back when your crypto is not even there. And so that was absolutely crazy. So I had someone in Spain that he was really good in crypto and giving authorized advice at the time. And he got involved and said to her, just nothing you can do. Got involved, got deep in the weeds. In theory, you should be able to trace the transactions in the blockchain. There's a ledger, and for the blocks, I'm really excited about the crypto, because it's going to be a step forward, but we're still very early in the game. So it costs a lot of money to be able to trace back all these transactions back on the block. So obviously that will have cost her so much money, and that was a few years back. So it's just so difficult, because the amount of money is not I got scammed once, £3,000, and thankfully my bank managed to get it back on a day that was super stressed. And I said, you're going to get a refund. I'll tell you that another time. That was really funny, because I was stressed. I had some money coming back to me for free, and I went, yes, thank you. And that was gone. But obviously, we're talking about 3K versus, I think it was 120K, her whole life
So
savings.
painful. So painful. Wow.
Right. So that's for me crypto like very dangerous in that sense, because one, you're not educated enough. This girl just trusted someone that like pig butcher her, like essentially, you know, this, and I think we wanted to talk about this as well with the romance fraud and the pig butchering. And the difference is that, for me at least, and I think it's widely understood, is the emergency, right? I think now when the emergency kicks in, it affects less people because we're starting to be more aware. But the pig veteran is something that gets ingrained to you. She starts falling in love with this guy, and then all of a sudden, poof. And he helped her throughout the scam as well. Help her. So you think, this is even more dangerous. This is a new way to get through and scam people, and the consequences, you know, some can be fatal.
Just devastating consequences. And I mean, so one, that's a
lot.
It's a lot. Let me put it this. I was gonna say that's a terrible story. I wanna rephrase that. It's a well-told terrible story, right? I mean, you told it very well, and I mean it's an important narrative to hear because it happens. And so from a cybersecurity perspective, there's two big things at play in that particular case, right? You mentioned both of them. One, you've got the romance scam going on, right? And that's the pretext of the attack, right? Is like they play on that emotional aspect of the victim. In this case, I'm sorry, I think you said sister-in-law or friend. I don't remember which.
My friend's sister, yes.
So, Gotcha. And so, so you have that aspect, and then you mentioned the other term I wanted to make sure I called out, and that is pig butchering. And so I find that this is a term that not a lot of people have heard of, and it sounds like this really weird, gross thing, of course, right? But the term
I hate the label. I hate the name.
I know. It's just one of those things that I hate to say because it feels. But the concept is that the threat actor will choose a target through a pretext, in this case, a romance scam, and they are essentially the context is they're fattening the pig, right? They're priming the target to get as much money out of them as they possibly can. And from what I've read and researched in the industry, sometimes this can go on for years, right? And it usually starts with small amounts, like, hey, I need I need help with rent this month, or hey, can you send me money for my energy bill or whatever, right? And eventually it ends up to a point to where they've primed the target so much that, that's where the butchering aspect of the term comes in, right? It's like, okay, we're going to take the target for everything that they're worth at this point, right? And so, coming back to the psychological aspect of this, you kind of alluded to this, but we so often focus so much on the crime and the scam and the threat actor, we don't often talk about the psychological impact on the victim. So, like, I can try to put myself in their place. If I lost six figures to a scam, like, I don't even know what I would do. I would just be beside myself, You
go through all these phases, and you could see in her, right? Like, not believing it, then start crying, then blaming everyone, and then what can I do? And then you're just devastated. So, and the problem is, or the lucky part she had in if there's anything of luck here, is that she had a really close family that really help her through. But what often happens is that you feel so ashamed that this has happened to you, that how am I going to go out there and explain that this has happened to me? Because obviously everyone is going to say you are crazy. So there's this shameful part that if you don't say anything, which there's a lot of statistics around it, but 40% of the romance frauds happened through dating apps. So, you know, and you think a lot of these people don't report it. And how is these people going through life, right? So, you know, I think there's a really important aspect where we need to normalize this, because I've been scammed, and yes, it was very silly of me, but just to normalize it in the sense of it's okay, and how can we do and educate people and educate myself so it doesn't happen again, because we're all going to be stressed. You know, white hats are going to be stressed, and anybody is a target, and the human, that phrase, the human is the weakest link. I know it's said a lot in the industry, but it's rather true, right? But AI also has weak links and problems. Nobody is perfect. So I think that the education part is such an essential thing, and seek help in terms of psychology, someone to talk therapies. You don't, back in the day it was so crazy to go to therapy. You had to be crazy to go to a psychiatrist or to a psychologist, right? I've been for many years, and to understand yourself, and I'm a psychologist. So, you know, that helps you get through life in a really peaceful way, because you know when you're going to be stressed. And if you know that you're going to be stressed, don't flick on your phone, or don't go through, you know, essential things that can lead you astray in a sense. So I think, and maybe this is for part two, but I think this sort of sequence of items and actions that need to take place after you've been in a cyber attack are really important, because it's mostly going to happen to most of us. And there's a lot of, like, sometimes I feel negative talk and putting fear in the public, like, don't do this, don't do that, stay alert. And, you know, yes, but I don't think people learn from being put fear on. There's like all, and you know better than me on that, so I shouldn't be telling you this.
No. You bring up an absolutely good point, and I see that in multiple facets of the cybersecurity industry. I think the place where it's most prevalent is if you are like doing a sales role in the cybersecurity industry. People, how do I want to say it? Fear is typically not a motivating factor. I mean, people think it is, but fear-based marketing and sales doesn't work, you know? And so I think it speaks to your point, right, in that, it just doesn't tend to be a motivator in some cases.
Definitely
a lot of cases.
not. Yes.
A lot of cases.
And I think working on that is going to be very important. And I think there's a lot of gamification and a lot of, you know, awareness that when you go to the cyber, you know, events that they're trying to do, and on LinkedIn you see a lot. But people normally aren't in these platforms. So how can you reach as many people as possible, especially the vulnerable type of people, which are normally the youngest and the eldest? How you reach to those? Because, you know, and even, you know, on the crypto side, yesterday it just came up, and very briefly, because I know we're talking a lot, but there was this crypto project called Bearer Chain, and the Bearer token is a token that hasn't even been released, right? And so Telegram is one of the platforms where everyone in the crypto space are hanging out, and
Right.
Twitter, X as well. And so there was this propaganda going around by Bearer token, and the FOMO kicked in, and there were like hundreds of tokens bought for the amount of $300,000, and then they just disclosed that it was a scam. So, you know, you're thinking about vulnerable people are the youngest and the eldest, but there's also other spaces where, you know, you're not educating yourself. You
Right.
know that this token hasn't even been launched, and the only person that can sell it right now is the owner of the project and the founder. So not even like this step of verification, people just buying anything for the fear of missing out. I find that concerning, and yeah, it's like putting fear onto people. Just be careful. Like,
And
this is so basic.
it's an interesting correlation here because we just got done talking about how fear of something bad happening to something or someone is typically not a motivator. But if there's something that I'm going to miss out on, that fear tends to resonate with a lot of people. So it's like that situation where a person has something to gain by participating in something. They're afraid of missing out on it. But this whole like, oh, that'll never happen to me, so I'm not going to be afraid of it thing is, it's just interesting correlations. I don't know as if I have anything meaningful to say about it other than it's an interesting observation, right?
No, it is. I mean, we can take it down to basics as people going to buy toilet paper in during COVID, not people thinking about what they're thinking and why, just to
Right.
be part of the crowd. And this is a social engineering technique, right? So
Yeah.
the all this social engineering and these platforms. I mean, I'm not on Instagram and Facebook anymore for the last sort of 8 months as a conscious act, and I'm not asking anybody to do this, but I just did it because I thought that my thought process was being diminished, because you are hearing people saying what they're thinking, and you're not having the chance to think about it because there's a next threat coming up and you've read this. So I think these quick dopamine hits, because this is what's causing you, right? And you want to go on to
Right.
the next. So I think what you just said is very meaningful, because it's not just the FOMO. It's the FOMO in any organization that people just wants to feel part of. And that goes back when football was created. This is nothing new.
Right.
People pertaining to a football team because they want to feel part of the crowd, and that's how the society gets together. And it's a wonderful thing. But if it's the goal is for something bad, like this might be that I just mentioned, then yeah, in September, like now is October, so last month there were over 20 hacks in the crypto space, and there was like around 120 million. So on
Wow.
losses, this is huge in 1 month only. So
One
if you
month. Yeah.
1 month.
Wow.
So if you think about that, all these people joining forces and all these people fearing that they're going to miss out onto something that doesn't exist, it can have like really bad consequences. So definitely it's a really important topic, and it's a very early stage industry. I do have my really good beliefs that is going to be amazing for certain society issue tackling, but also it needs still a lot of education, and there's a lot of great people doing amazing developer relations and a lot of education, but people, we need to be conscious on educating ourselves and understanding ourselves and understanding what's in our mind to be able to create our own judgment rather than what the Telegram group says to buy.
Right. You know, we've talked about several items in this episode where I think you're going to have to come back for another episode, Angelica. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and it's funny.
These were really fun.
They are, and you keep mentioning things, and I keep going down these little side roads, but we're unfortunately out of time for today's episode. But we will have to have you back on. I'm looking forward to that. So I want to thank you for taking the time today to come and share your knowledge and insights. This has been a very interesting discussion. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think this is a part of cybersecurity that is not talked about enough. So I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for bringing me on, Andy. I had a lovely, fun time, and I look forward to being back. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate it.
Sorry for digressing so much. There's so much I would talk about.
You know, that's what these discussions are for. I start every episode with, like 4 or 5 main bullet points that I want to make sure I cover, but those organic conversations often bring the most value, right? So I
think so.
I appreciate it, definitely. So, and those of you watching, if you found value in today's episode, which I hope you did, and you're watching on the YouTubes, be sure to smash that like and subscribe button. Tell myself I'm not going to say that every single time, but I always end up doing. Anyway, and we are also available on all the major podcasting platforms. So chances are, wherever you consume your content, you can find that. So with us... I've lost my ability to talk. It's funny. I get to like the 40-minute mark of every episode, and I just start stumbling across my words, which means it's time to end the show. So anyway, appreciate you all spending some time with us today. We'll see you again next week for a future episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Have a good one.